Well, hello everyone, and this is mine and John's first Facebook live stream. So hopefully you're here with us and joining with us, and we're looking forward to you being able to comment and chat with us. But what we're actually going to do today is we're going to introduce John. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Brendan Roach, and things worked out. Excuse me. We have
That's
the
it. We've
right
got it.
names. There we go. That's better. We've got the right names now. So, as you can see with me, I'm Dr. Brendan Roach. I'm the founder and the president of ACTS, and Dr. John Symons is the director of French training. And we're going to have a little bit of a chat with him and find out a little bit of his history and background. So, John, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Wow, that's a really broad question. Where do you want me to start, Brendan?
I'll ask you a little bit more specific. Why don't you tell us a little about you, and maybe we'll start with your family
Right.
and a
Yeah,
little
okay.
bit of your history with back in Africa and things like that.
Okay. Well, I was born in Darwin in the Northern Territory of Australia, tropical paradise, and this tropical born boy still likes going back to the tropics. And this time of the year in the southern hemisphere is not my favourite time of year for sure. Um, It's yeah, a sister and a couple of brothers. My dad was actually a Methodist missionary among Australian Indigenous people in the Northern Territory, and I spent
Okay.
the first 10 years of my life in Darwin. Cyclone Tracy, which was a really big storm that destroyed Darwin in Christmas 1974, blew us to South Australia, and I've been kind of a bit of a South Australian since then, except I've been in many different countries.
So, what was your? I think you had a bit of a history as a young person in doing some work on some beaches around Australia and some cross cultural ministry. Tell
Yes.
us a little bit about how you got into that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was through Scripture Union, which is an organisation which here in Australia runs evangelistic mission teams in caravan parks during holiday times, usually over the summer, the Christmas period here in Australia. And so from early 80s, just about when I was leaving, just when I was finishing school, I was involved in the teams in caravan parks. They're there for a week or sometimes 2 weeks, depending on the location, and we hold meetings, doing evangelism, developing relationships with people in the caravan park, and so on. I went on and led 3 of those mission teams at a place called Wallaroo on York Peninsula in South Australia in the mid 80s. And yeah, that was, I suppose, my first taste of ministry.
Okay. And how did we? I mean, I know you very well, and I know you spent 10 years in Africa,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
why a lot of people that think that's quite a, I don't know, a typical missionary or even a romantic location as far as Australian and Westerners are concerned to go onto the mission field. How did it come about that you got that thought or that idea to head off to Africa and be a missionary?
Yeah, well, a lot of it wasn't very romantic, I can assure you. There were some very unromantic moments, although, yeah. Look, in the early 90s, my wife and I were living in Darwin. We were part of a church there. I was leading the youth ministry. We were sitting in church one Sunday morning when a couple of missionaries who worked with Wycliffe Bible translators were talking to the church about the work they did. And both my wife and I that morning, it's the kind of experience where you feel like you're the only person in the room. There was 200 people in church that morning, but it felt to me like I was the only one, and that guy up the front was talking to me. So it was a very kind of God pointing a finger at me kind of experience. And, on the way home from church, I'd meant to get some of the literature that this guy had, and I'd forgotten. I was busy organising things for that night's youth meeting. And I said to my wife, "Oh, I forgot to get some of that guy's pamphlets. I was really interested in what he was saying." And she opens up a handbag and said, "You mean these ones?" She'd just gone along the table and picked up all the literature. And God said something to you too today, did he? So it was really one of those times where God spoke to both of us, and it's really good when it happens that way. You don't have one of a couple sort of wondering whether their spouse is hearing from God or going nuts. You both heard from God the same morning, and it was quite an experience. Yeah. So, we ended up leaving Darwin, going to Bible College in Adelaide. I hadn't had any Bible College training at all at that stage. Went to the Bible College of South Australia, did a bachelor degree in theology, and then did some linguistics with SIL in Melbourne, and did a whole year of introduction to linguistics and a whole lot of other things. Wycliffe have a really good thing going there where they, you're applying for membership to their organisation and they've got you there for a year in a pressure cooker, and they can really see how you respond under pressure, and it's a really good situation for them. So that was 1996. You joined Wycliffe Bible Translators and headed on a totally different ministry.
And then, as part of your training, you went across to somewhere in France, and you did
That's
it,
right,
18
yeah.
months of language training?
That's right, yeah, because we were planning to go to to Francophone Africa, in particular in Chad was the nation we had in mind. Wycliffe are very definite about people who are going in a role as educators to speak the language of education very well. So we spent 18 months in France, in Savoie, learning French, and then on to Cameroon for a few months as a sort of a Africa orientation, if you like, before we got to Chad. That was April 2000, I think it was. We landed in Chad for the first time. Of course, April was the hot season in Chad, and it's on the edge of the Sahara Desert, and anyone who lives in that part of the world knows what hot means. You got 6 weeks of maximums exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, and quite a few days over 50, and it's hot. So it was quite a welcome to Africa for us.
Well, there might be some of our French students from Kinshasa or other parts of French-speaking Africa. So why don't you give them a greeting in French?
Bon, je peux parler le français, mais personne qui parle que l'anglais va le comprendre, hein. Mais s'il y a des étudiants qui nous écoutent à ce moment, qui sont les francophones, salutations alors. Dans le futur, c'est prévu que je vais faire des émissions en français, mais pour la plupart, cette fois, on va parler l'anglais.
Okay, so just for anybody listening, we're going to have a bit of a chance to, if anybody has some questions for John a little bit later, feel free to post them in the comment section, and we'll see if we can get John to answer one or two of those. So you end up in Chad and Cameroon, and
Cameroon for just a few months, and then we were ministering in Chad, yeah.
And so you're working with doing Bible translation and sort of how did you settle into life in Africa, life and ministry in Africa?
Well, as I said, the hot season in Chad was a bit of an unpleasant welcome to Africa for us, but we were fortunate in that we joined a group of really good people there. SIL had a base there in N'Djamena, and we were looked after very well. They showed us around, told us what to do, what not to do, where to go, where not to go, all of that kind of thing, and we were fortunate too. Obviously, we became part of a church there in N'Djamena, and some really good people in that church who became close to us as well. So we got to know quite a few of the locals there, and as far as I can remember, we adjusted very well. For the first few months, we were in N'Djamena working at the SIL centre there. On the centre, I was called the centre manager there, which meant I was looking supervising the security guards, supervising maintenance guys, and all that kind of thing, which wasn't what I went there for, but it was a good start, and it was absolutely needed at the time. And we spent a bit of time in eastern Chad, in Abeshe, not far from the Sudanese border, and all this time we were trying to get a hold on Chadian Arabic, and then after that, we finished up in the south of Chad in a village called Kutu, not far from Mundu in the south. And I was working with the Chadian Bible Translation Organisation as a liaison with SIL, and so I spent quite a bit of time with various Chadian translation teams, doing exegesis with them, and that was a process where we'd look at the scriptures in French. We'd discuss them, we'd do the exegesis, we'd work out what it really actually meant, and then these guys would do a first draft in their own language, and that's the beginning of the translation process. So I did that with several of the village teams there in the south of Chad during a period of a couple of years that I was down there. And Chad has some really fond memories for me, met some really good people, has some difficult memories too. Malaria was a real issue in the south of Chad, and I think all my kids got it at one stage or another. I got it, and had some fun too. It was really quite a well, we were about 5 years there in all. Yeah.
So how did you do you feel like that's an incredibly substantial ministry that you're involved in? Do you feel like you've left something that's going to be able to be used for the generations of people in Chad? How do you feel about your time in your ministry in Chad?
Yeah, I think so. My impact was probably, one could say, small. I wasn't overseeing the translation of an entire New Testament or anything like that, but the contribution I made among those several teams in the south of Chad over that couple of year period, it was a small but significant contribution. Yeah, and I was involved as well. I didn't mention earlier in training Indigenous translators in Chad, and teaching linguistics and exegesis and so on. And as you know, Brendan, the impact of training on people is lifelong, and it's something that stays with people for a long time. We were disappointed, I think, when we left Chad initially, because we had planned to stay there a lot longer. My wife became ill at the time, and the illness she had couldn't really be appropriately treated in Chad. And so, Wycliffe said to us that it was not a good idea for us to go back to Chad. They did, however, allow us to go to Kenya. The medical facilities there were the good medical facilities available in country, and I think that was the main thing, because in Chad, to get the adequate help that my wife was going to need should a crisis arrive, was going to be a trip to Europe from Chad, and that may have been just too late. So in Kenya, the help was available in country if she needed it, and that was the difference. And so we then branched off on a different ministry that we had not initially expected, developing a missionary training college in Kenya.
So how did you go about? So you ended up in Mbale, which is in Western Kenya.
Western
How
Kenya,
did you end up in Mbale and not in Nairobi like so many other? Western Kenya
had reflected a lot on our ministry
Kenya
in Chad, and it was a traditional sort of missions model where an expatriate comes and directs a program, to achieve the goals of that program. And we felt, my wife and I felt quite strongly that where a good, viable church existed, it was actually much better to work with that church to help that church do its mission. And so we had this idea that we wanted to develop a training college. And so through various contacts we had in Melbourne, because Melbourne was then our base, and through the church there, Pastor Stephen Wyndham, whom believe you know, Brendan, he had some contacts in Kenya, and he'd spent some time in Kenya, and it was actually Bishop Thomas Muthee, who's at Kiambu, north of Nairobi, who's the guy that Pastor Stephen Wyndham knew very well. And Bishop Thomas suggested to us that one of his people, Bishop Isaac, who lived in Bali, would be the person we should talk to, because Bishop Isaac also wanted to start a missionary training college. And so, this is something that's happened again and again, not exactly the same, but this kind of thing has happened over and over in our ministry, where we've seen when God speaks to you about something, he also speaks to someone else about it. And, if God's calling you to do something, he's also going to speak to other people who can facilitate that. And he's going to speak to other people who are wanting to do the same thing, as was the case here. Bishop Isaac wanted to develop a missionary training college, and he was going to do it whether we turned up or not. Okay. It would have happened very differently. It might have happened more slowly. But we turned up, and we got in right behind his vision, and that's the best way to do it, in my humble opinion. Where there's a viable church with a live vision, you get in there and make that vision happen. You can leave again, and the thing keeps running. It doesn't die with you. And I've seen so many ministries in Africa, and I guess it happens elsewhere too, where people go in full of vision and passion, and they're there for a while. They splash around in the bucket, so to speak. But then they leave again, and then things crumble fairly soon after they leave. And it's because it wasn't a local vision, and it wasn't a vision that was shared by the people they were going to minister with. And I think that's a really important thing. Yeah. And it's why I'm so passionate about Acts, actually.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned that. So here's a bit of a dangerous question for you, John. How's that Bible college going in Western Kenya today?
They're
You
going
put
really,
it out
really
there. Is it
well.
still going with?
No, they're going really, really
it's
well.
doing well.
COVID sort of, made them sort of walk through mud a bit for a while, because student numbers dropped, and of course that affected finances and things like that. But though that college is going very well. In fact, in the first couple of years after we left and came back to Australia, it grew really fast. So I wasn't quite sure whether to take that as a compliment or an insult. But the point is, it was
It's
doing
always
very
fun
well,
when
and is
it's
still
always fun
going
when
well
you
today.
pray the ministry does. Sorry, it's always fun when you pray for the ministry to do well once you leave, and it does. You don't know exactly how to feel about that, do you?
And I'm not sure how to feel about that. Yeah. But no, look, I've maintained contact with my friends there in Bali since then, and I've been back several times to visit. So yeah.
Great. And so what made you transition and come back to Australia and leave Africa? Because Kenya and other parts of Africa are clearly your heart and your passion. So
yeah, look, I mentioned earlier that my wife was ill and was the reason why we couldn't go back to Chad. And unfortunately, despite our prayers to the contrary, that illness continued to develop during the time that we were in Kenya. And she reached a point at the end of 2012 where she was really quite ill, and we had to come back to Australia to continue her treatment. And she died in June 2013. So, at the time, I had 5 children, and I wasn't going anywhere back to Kenya or anywhere else immediately to continue ministry at that time. And actually, that was about the time I started working more with you, Brendan, while you were at Harvest. I do seem to remember.
Yeah, and that's sort of you came back, and you were in Melbourne at that time, and doing a little bit of work for Harvest and getting to know us, and I got to know you a lot better, and had sort of crossed paths a few times in Africa at conferences and things like that. And I just felt at that time that we were going to be doing something together. And I don't know even if I really shared that with you. Sometimes that's a bit of a dangerous thing to sort of share if it's and I remember then you were told us the happy news that you were getting remarried. So tell us a little bit about your your wife,
Yeah,
and what I love to
yeah.
call the Brady Bunch.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's amazing what God does sometimes. I mean, my second wife, Joy, to whom I've been married about 8 years now, was someone I knew as a teenager. We were good friends. Went to the same youth group, the same church when we were teenagers back in the 1970s and early 80s. And if you'd told us back then that one day we would be married, we would have laughed at you, because that was really just not something that was going to happen as far as either of us was concerned, I don't think. But it's just amazing what God does, and there's an old connection there that really makes things a whole lot easier. I didn't have to work out who this woman was or where she'd come from. I knew where she'd come from. I was there, and so that really helps a lot in developing relationships. Joy and I were married in 2015 in April, and at that time, well, a few months before that, I'd moved back over to South Australia from Melbourne, and my base since then has been in South Australia. And yeah, that's been the last 8 years now. The Brady Bunch, Brendan. Brendan refers to an old TV show where there was a family with a lot of kids. I think I mentioned a little while ago that I fathered five. I have a son and four daughters. Well, Joy has seven children of her own, roughly the same ages as mine. Her eldest is about a
Wow.
year or two younger than my eldest, and her youngest is about 3 years younger than my youngest. Sort of parallel families that happened quite separately. But yeah, we came together. Technically, between us, we have 12 children. They were never living together in the same house at the same time, fortunately. We just don't have a house big enough for that. The most of them we had with us at any one time was seven, and we've only got two of them left now.
Wow.
They've all moved away and made their own lives in various places. We see them regularly, of course, but there's only two of them still living
Mhm.
with us now.
So tell us a little bit about your role. You're the director of French training, and you've developed, and those who are doing the French programs would be well known to John, seeing him regularly in the lectures. So
Yeah,
tell us a
yeah,
little bit about your heart and passion for the francophone African
yeah.
students.
I'm not sure the students would recognise me too well, Brendan. I mean, some of those videos I've got a short beard, and other videos I've got it down my chest a bit. That was just because the videos were done at different times, and it's some of them were even done as early as 2014, 15 when I was working with you at Harvest, and some were done later. Um, but yeah, look. Uh, I really feel like my work at Axe has pulled together various experience and competencies that I've had over my years of ministry, Brendan. It's quite astonishing how my experience in Chad, my ability and experience teaching and preaching in French, mixed with my developing a training college in Kenya, mixed with my teaching in Bible colleges in Australia,
Mm.
all comes together and mixes together to produce a context which is just really, really good for working at Axe. Just those various
Mm.
experiences are just all blended together in something that's like God has been preparing.
Mm.
I've spent my life ministering, but at the same time, it
Mm.
seems, with the benefit of old eagle eye hindsight, I've also spent my life preparing
Mm.
to work at Axe, and that's
Mm.
mind blowing. That's really, really amazing how God has, not only was He calling us to a ministry which at the time was valid and effective and needed, but He was also preparing us for another ministry that has come about, and that's mind blowing how God does that. It's really, really amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and it has just been incredible. We went to Kinshasa together to launch the French program
Yeah,
in August.
it's just
Got Bishop
nearly a year
Jesse
ago.
here, who's from Western. Yeah, nearly a year ago. Gee, wow, how that's gone. 15,000 pastors at the conference. Of
Yeah,
course,
yeah. Oh,
I remember when we went there. Do you remember when we went there 2 or 3? Oh, gee, was it 2 or 3 or 5 years before to Bishop Pastor Sembe Israel Sembe's conference,
Yeah.
and we had recorded some, and we showed them the videos. Of course, there's Dr. Brendan Roach. He doesn't speak a word of French unless you count cafe latte in the equation. And
That's Italian.
so
That's
they're
Italian.
going, no, there you go. Can't even get that right. And croissant, there you go. Creme brulee. Anyway, so don't speak French. And so we're there, and we're announcing what we hope that we're able to do, which we were finally able to do in August 2022. And we had some clips of you teaching, and
right.
I just remember the overwhelming response. I mean, how did that warm your heart when you've got 7,000 people at that conference who are seeing someone teach the Bible to them in French, not subtitled or being spoken to in English? That was so exciting for me.
Yeah.
How was it for you?
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. Look, I've found that there's been there's so much more material available in English than there is in French. The worldwide, you look at libraries in English, theological libraries in English, and they're large. Theological libraries in French, not so much. The number of Bible colleges available and online and face to face in English, much more than there is available in French. So, a lot of our brothers and sisters in Francophone Africa and other places like Haiti and places like that are screaming out for some training. They've got to learn English or rely on subtitles or something, and it's much better to get it to you in the language.
Yeah, and that's a really exciting part of what we're doing now. I think probably a third to a quarter of our students are now Francophone Africans. So that's a great blessing. That's a great part of what you're doing, John, in running that program and teaching that program and communicating with the students. Any chance that you'll do a couple of these live streams in French for our French students? Is that a possibility, John? Not
Yeah, it
putting
is
you
a
on the spot
definite
or anything.
possibility. And actually, that's one of the things I said in French a little bit earlier when you asked me to greet people in French. I said, well, we're going to do a couple of these in French in the future. Don't quite know when, but that's what's going to happen. So, I mean, obviously, this is a get to know Dr. John, and who knows, we might do a get to know Dr. Brendan or something like that. And but then, we'll both be doing various live streams at various stages, won't we, Brendan? And it's planned for me to do some of those in French, so I'm looking forward to that. Have to get the word out there in Congo and Cameroon and Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso and all those places.
Yeah, and even our first French-speaking graduate was from Haiti, so a lot of the
That's right.
Caribbean islands were and different.
In fact, we had quite a lot of
Amazing how the
students.
ministry's reached all around the world.
Yeah, a lot of students from Haiti, and it quite surprised me at first. But
So
there you go. That just goes to show what I didn't know.
yeah, so the time zone here is for those of you who aren't aware. I live in Melbourne, which is in the east coast of Australia, in a slightly different time zone to John, who lives in Adelaide or South Australia, and that's what we call a central time zone. And so there's a little bit of a difference there, but it's a terrible time zone for the US or North or South America. So maybe some of the Haitian students and others from that part of the world might be able to look at the recording and connect in that way. And I know it's a bit of an early time for some of you guys in Africa, but hopefully you can do that. We've got great to see a lot of our students and active people there. We've got Jean Claude, who's well known to us from DR Congo. We've got Gift, who recently just graduated, so it's wonderful to see him on board, and a lot of these guys are helping out with the Facebook groups and stuff like that. So we want to now start to do this on a regular basis and do little teachings and connect with you and ask you questions. And so feel free to leave any comments in the groups and give us some feedback, and feel free to ask John an awkward question right now. I know you wonderful African pastors are too polite to ask John any awkward questions, but I might have to ask him one. So let me. We haven't probably talked too much about this, John. So no pressure. But where do you see? What's your hopes? What's your vision? What's your dream that could possibly happen in the future as the Ministry of Acts starts to grow and develop?
Yeah, I see long term. I see myself back in Africa, Brendan, and that's not going to happen in the immediate future. There's lots of reasons why not. I'll have to content myself with just visits for the moment, but in the long term, I see myself back in Africa, perhaps based with my friends in Western Kenya, but from there able to visit very easily many African countries. And so as the Ministry of Acts expands, and in particular we become a bit more a solid foundation financially, we'll be able to support me living in, well, for example, Western Kenya. From there, I'd be able to facilitate the Ministry of Acts in Africa, and particularly in Francophone Africa, much more easily than I can from here.
Yeah. So that's something that we would love to see happen, and we're praying and believing in, and looking to raise funds for that at the moment. So that's really exciting. So guys, pray and believe with us, and we will take it from there. So John, thank you very much. Thank you for your ministry over all these years. Thank you for all you do with Acts, and thank you for Joy, and who volunteers in the ministry as well. And it's just exciting to be with you. It's exciting to see the fruitfulness of your ministry. And next time round, we'll swap the seats, and we'll get you to ask me a few questions and things like that. So the next one, we'll be getting to know Dr. Brennan, and we'll post that up on the Facebook groups, and we'll let you know when that's going to be. But that'll be in a week or so as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. And we will catch up with you, and we will do that again in the future. John, why don't you just finish in a word of prayer for us?
Thank you, Lord Jesus, for this day that's available for us to serve you, and we praise you, and we want to bring you glory this day for what we do, through what we say, through just the ordinary things we do, through the ministry things we do. Lord, may your name be glorified, and I pray, Lord, that as the Ministry of Acts expanded, that your hand will be upon it, that more and more people will come to know about Acts Bible College, and that the effect of this ministry will become enormous throughout the world. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, John. See you later.
Thank you,
All
Brendan.
the best, everyone.
See ya.
And we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.